Have you ever watched a moment in sports that felt strangely heavier than the game itself? A moment where the arena noise seems to fade, the camera zooms in, and suddenly, something deeper is unfolding. That's what Week 8 of the NHL felt like. Not just a collection of plays. Not just wins and losses. But something psychological. Something human. Something dark. Because what happened on the ice this week wasn't just athletic performance. It was a glimpse into the hidden machinery of the mind: pressure, ego, identity, tribalism, fear, pride, and the silent battles that players never speak about publicly. And once you see the psychology behind it, you can't unsee it. Let's dive into the dark psychology behind what really happened in the NHL in Week 8. It starts with something subtle: body language. The camera cuts to a player on the bench. His jaw is tight. His eyes don't blink. He isn't watching the game. He's replaying a mistake. In psychology, this is called cognitive looping. A self-punishing replay. One wrong move becomes a mental ghost, haunting every next decision. Week 8 was full of these moments. Moments where it was clear that the real battle wasn't between teams. It was between players and their own minds. Fear of letting the team down. Fear of disappointing millions watching. Fear of losing the one thing they've built their identities around. When an athlete cracks under pressure, people online mock them. But what they ignore is that these players carry a level of psychological weight that most people will never experience. And Week 8 showed that weight breaking through the cracks. One of the darkest forces in sports psychology is identity entanglement. This happens when the self merges completely with the sport. A player doesn't say, "I play hockey." He says, "I am hockey." His worth becomes tied to his performance. His self-respect becomes tied to whether a puck hits a post. In Week 8, you could see this in the frustration, the outbursts, the dropped shoulders after a bad shift. It wasn't just disappointment. It was identity fracturing in real time. When an athlete believes a bad game means I am a bad person, their brain enters survival mode. And survival mode is where dark psychology shows itself. Sudden aggression. Risky plays. Overcompensation. Emotional numbness. Miscommunications. And sometimes, a moment that becomes the headline of the week. But why was Week 8 different? Why did everything feel heavier, more emotional, more raw? Because Week 8 is where fatigue meets expectation. It's where the season stops feeling new and starts feeling defining. It's where players are no longer fueled by excitement, and instead fueled by fear. Fear of falling behind. Fear of being forgotten. Fear of losing their spot. Fear of being exposed. And fear is one of the strongest motivators in the human brain. But also one of the most destructive. When fear mixes with adrenaline, the brain becomes unpredictable. Some players rise. Others implode. Some get sharper. Others unravel. Week 8 became a psychological mirror, reflecting exactly who was mentally prepared, and who wasn't. Let's talk about crowd psychology. People think home advantage is about the fans supporting the team. But the truth is darker. Crowds influence players through primal psychology. A screaming crowd activates the same neural patterns as ancient tribal gatherings. The noise isn't just sound. It's pressure. It's expectation. It's judgment. In Week 8, one away team visibly struggled under the pressure. Their passes got sloppier. Their reactions slower. Not because they weren't skilled, but because the human brain cannot perform at its peak under that level of social surveillance. When 20,000 people watch you in real time, something inside shifts. The brain becomes hyper-aware. Self-conscious. Overthinking. Overanalyzing. In psychology, this is known as spotlight anxiety. The fear of being seen. The fear of being judged. The fear of failing publicly. And in Week 8, several players were drowning in that invisible spotlight. Then comes anger. One of the most misunderstood psychological forces in sports. On the surface, anger looks like strength, intensity, passion. But in the mind of an athlete, anger usually means one thing: loss of control. Anger is a protective mechanism triggered when the ego feels threatened. A missed opportunity. A disrespectful hit. A bad call. A teammate not passing. It doesn't matter what the trigger is. Once anger takes the wheel, rational thinking steps aside. In Week 8, we saw flashes of this everywhere. Slashed sticks. Aggressive body checks. Tiny confrontations that escalated because the tension was already simmering. Anger in sports is rarely about the moment. It's about everything bubbling underneath. But the darkest psychology of Week 8 wasn't anger. It wasn't pressure. It wasn't fear. It was comparison. The invisible rivalry between players, not with other teams, but with each other. Every player knows who's performing better. Who's getting more attention. Who's becoming the fan favorite. Who's slipping. Who's rising. And comparison is poisonous. Comparison leads to insecurity. Insecurity leads to resentment. Resentment leads to self-sabotage. A player doesn't have to break physically to break mentally. Sometimes, all it takes is watching someone else succeed. Week 8 revealed that in ways most viewers will never notice. You could see it in the way players avoided eye contact after bad shifts. The way a star player looked shaken when a rookie outperformed him. The way frustration was directed inward, disguised as aggression, but rooted in insecurity. This is the part of sports nobody talks about. The quiet psychological warfare that happens inside locker rooms and inside minds. Another hidden force, ego depletion. When an athlete spends too much time controlling emotions, frustration, disappointment, overthinking, the brain gets tired. Not physically. Psychologically. And when ego is exhausted, the body reacts. Slower reflexes. Sloppy passes. Poor decision-making. Impulsive choices. Week 8 was full of ego depletion. Players trying too hard to stay mentally strong eventually cracked. Because real mental strength isn't about suppression. It's about acceptance. But athletes aren't trained to accept emotions. They're trained to hide them. And hidden emotions always leak out, in performance, in body language, in subtle mistakes. Here's something deeper. Humans need a sense of control to feel safe. But sports take that control away. A player can do everything right, and still lose. Still get criticized. Still get benched. In Week 8, when control slipped away, you could see the panic rise. Players held on to the puck too long. Made reckless moves. Tried to force plays that weren't there. In psychology, this is known as overcorrection. Trying to fix the loss of control by grabbing even harder. But the brain doesn't work that way. The tighter you grip, the more you choke. And this week, several games were decided not by skill, but by who lost control, and who reclaimed it. Now let's talk about something most people deny. The unconscious mind drives almost every behavior on the ice. Micro-expressions. Subtle hesitations. The way a player's shoulders rise before a mistake. The way his pupils dilate when he's nervous. The way his breathing shifts after a bad shift. These cues are silent, but powerful. In Week 8, these subconscious signals were everywhere, telling a second story beneath the game. A story of doubt. A story of fear. A story of internal conflict. If you slow down certain clips, you'll notice. The moment the brain breaks its rhythm is the moment the game turns. 1 second of hesitation can dismantle momentum. 1 moment of doubt can trigger a cascade of mistakes. The unconscious mind is always speaking. Most people just don't know how to listen. And then, there's the darkest layer. The need to prove oneself. Every athlete carries a personal wound, something from childhood, something from early career, something they've chased for years. Validation. Approval. Respect. Week 8 awakened those wounds. A player who never got enough praise overperformed and burned out. Another who always felt underestimated tried to be the hero, and failed. Another who grew up fighting for recognition pushed himself beyond his limit. Sports reveal wounds because sports test identity. And identity is fragile. But here's the most important question of all. What are players really fighting for? Is it victory? Pride? Legacy? Money? Respect? Or something deeper? Acceptance. Belonging. The feeling of being enough. The desire to not disappoint the people who believe in them. When you remove the noise, the stats, the drama, you're left with something universal and human. The fear of not being good enough. And Week 8 exposed that fear in countless ways. So let's end with a burning question. What if the real game wasn't the one on the ice, but the one happening inside every player's mind? What if the famous moments, the dramatic shifts, the controversies, weren't accidents, but symptoms of deeper emotional battles? What if Week 8 wasn't chaotic, but honest? What if it exposed what being human under extreme pressure truly looks like? Because when you strip away the arena lights, the statistics, the jerseys, the hype, you're left with a truth that is darker, and maybe more beautiful. These athletes aren't just players. They're human beings navigating the most emotionally demanding environment imaginable. And sometimes, the mind becomes the real battlefield. That is the dark psychology behind what really happened in the NHL in Week 8.